Hi, everybody. Hi, and welcome to today's session. My name is Leonora. I am Cities and Regions Lead at the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and I am calling live from the London Global Doughnut Day. So here I am joined by, wave to the people. Hey. A lot of people from London who have come here to discuss, to exchange, and to join us on this day. So today we will be focusing on talking about the Doughnut Unrolled, a framework for downscaling the doughnut to the scale of places. And we will be joined by several practitioners who will be sharing various ways in which they've put this framework into practice. So, thank you for joining all of us. Thank you for joining everybody in the chat. Please share where you're joining us from and what you're interested in and what your name is and anything else. And we'll just get started now, as we have a tight schedule to go through, and I will be introducing our speakers as we go along. So I'm just gonna start sharing my screen, hopefully. All good? Okay, for those of you joining online, be aware that there's British Sign Language interpreters in the session, and you can click the interpretation button to enable it, and post check with Lee and Arthur for any technical issues, and keep yourself muted, please. So we'll get started, and as I said, we'll be joined by three, unfortunately Dani is sick, by three practitioners who will be sharing their work. So to get started, this is the doughnut, of course, and it's the compass for humanity. It's inviting us to meet the needs of all people while within the means of the living planet. So leaving no one falling short on life's essential, leave no one in the hole in the middle, and not overshoot those planetary limits on the outside. So that's the doughnut, that's the core concept of doughnut economics. But how do we turn this idea into action in our places? What would it mean for our place to live in the doughnut? And the way that we do it is by doing this thing we call unrolling the doughnut. So we zoom into that safe and just green space of the doughnut, and we ask, what do we need to do in our place in order to live in that place, to get to that safe and just space for humanity? And when we do that, when we zoom into and we have the ecological ceiling on top and the social foundation on bottom, we ask this guiding question for all of our places. And this is the starting point for bringing our places, our cities, our town, our neighborhoods into the safe and just space of the doughnut. And that question is, how can our place become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And this one long question really holds four complex questions in it. Because when we downscale the doughnut to our places, we start recognizing not only the ecological ceiling and the social foundation, but also that we need to be thinking about local aspirations as much as global responsibilities. And this is how we get these four lenses: the local social, the local ecological, the global social, and the global ecological. So we have these four guiding questions. The first one, the local social one: how can all the people of our place thrive? What does it mean to thrive in each of our places? It's a very different thing in London, in Mexico, in Cairo. So we're looking at meeting the needs of all people, looking at all of these dimensions, these white icons on the bottom, enabling people to have access to food, to water, to health, to education, to housing, to human rights, to political participation. What does it mean to take action to enable all the people of our place thrive? That's the local social lens. The local ecological lens is asking us, how can our place be as generous as nearby nature? Or how can we restore and regenerate nearby nature? And this lens is inviting us to recognize that even though we're now sitting in buildings, in places, on paved surfaces, in cities, we are built on what was once a healthy, thriving natural habitat. And if we go out of our places, out of our cities, out of our villages, into the still healthy, balanced, thriving nature, we can see that it continues to live in balance, to cleanse the air, to house biodiversity, to store carbon, to cycle water, to harvest energy, regulate temperature, build and protect soil. So we're asking, how can we be as generous as nature? How can we design and plan our places so that we not only sustain them, not only do no harm, but we start to actively regenerate and restore them as nature does? And then we zoom out into the global ecological lens, asking how can our place respect the health of the whole planet? And this is about recognizing that our actions here have impact on the planetary boundaries and impact across the world. So it's about asking and taking action to decarbonize our energy system, our transport, our housing systems, to change our lifestyles and consumption patterns in order to reduce the pressures that we're currently putting on our planet, on climate change, on land use, on biodiversity. And finally, the fourth lens, the most invisible one in daily practice, in cities, in communities, in conversations even, I would say, is the global social lens, asking how can our place respect the well-being of all people? And this is about recognizing that in this globalized, connected world, so much of the actions we take here have impact on people in other places around the world, whether it's the products we use, where is this microphone coming from, where were these materials extracted from, stored, produced, transported, what were the conditions of all of those workers, what were the impacts on all of those communities along the way that had a role in bringing all of these things to us. What are the different ways in which we can impact positively the well-being of people elsewhere, whether it's through supply chains and procurement, whether it's through learning and networking opportunities, whether it's through protests and lobbying. How can our place respect the well-being of all people? So these are the four lenses. This is the Doughnut Unrolled framework of the four lenses, this holistic framework that becomes the entry point of various different types of action through donut economics in places. And we at Deal have developed a set of tools to get everybody started. These are all open source and available for everybody, allowing you to start experimenting in your own place with these concepts. And we're going to explore a bit about the various kind of entry point and ways to be using these four lenses. So one is what we call the community portrait of a place. And so the community portrait of a place is about building an idea, an understanding, a vision of our places at the scale of neighborhoods, at the scale of communities, by using kind of these guiding questions. It's about identifying challenges or law constraints or initiatives and projects or dreams. And there are many ways that we can be using this approach in our communities, in our neighborhoods, on our street, or also at a city scale, holding these conversations. And this is also a part of what we're doing here today. We're kind of co-developing this community portrait of a place for London. So you can be using it in different ways. You can be thinking about a community portrait for different ways as a way to map the state of a place. So to ask this guiding question, what is the state of our place today? What is working and what isn't? What are our local strengths and challenges through these four lenses? What is already, what do we already know? We can be using it as a way to be co-designing community-led visions. So to be asking, what does it mean to be thriving for us? If we were to co-create, to think about how we can thrive locally and enable people elsewhere to thrive, take care of the planet here locally as well across the world. What would it mean to co-create those community-led visions here? It could be used as a way to making the change visible, to map initiatives, projects, organizations that already exist in a place, that are already helping us all move in the donut, whether it's the local food bank, whether it's the local coffee place that's working with sustainable practices, whether it's a refugee organization, whether it's social support groups or local ecology group. What are all the different things that already exist, and how can we use these four lenses to start mapping them and seeing them all together as working collectively towards a common vision? And we can also be using these four lenses to be mapping stories, histories, lived experiences in places. So many different entry points, choosing different questions to get started on this journey of building a community portrait of a place. Another approach is methodology that we call the data portrait of a place. So the data portrait of a place is essentially building, and this is what London Doughnut Coalition have built, and you can see here on the back, but it's about building a data-led understanding of how our place is currently doing right now. What does it mean? We zoom into each of these 4 lenses and into each individual dimension. So if we see here in the local social lens, and we zoom into the mobility dimension, we're asking, what are some targets that our place currently have? And these normally live in various local government-led visions, policies of place. So we set various targets, sometimes very vague, all people will thrive by 2030, sometimes very specific, we'll reduce emissions by 30% in 5 years' time, etc. So what is a target that we currently have, or several targets? In this example, this target is the area is accessible by everyone by public transport in a safe and accessible way. And what is the best available performance indicator of how we're currently doing towards achieving that target? So what are we measuring that's telling us whether we're meeting this target or not? And more often than not, we'll discover that we don't have these things, that we set these targets and visions, and then we don't really measure if we're achieving them. And this is also about building that holistic data vision portrait and understanding. So this could be, in 2022, 60% of all journeys were made by public transport. So if we do this for all 4 lenses and for all dimensions there, we build this image of how we're currently doing as a place through these 4 lenses. And then we can re-roll the 4 lenses back into a donut and build a donut of our place that is telling us very clearly where we're doing well and where we're doing not so well. And again, this can be a starting point for many different types of initiatives and ways of using this, both in local government as well as in various different types of sectors. So we can be using it again as a state of a place. So understanding how a place is currently doing, this is Brussels donut, or seeing year by year as an annual state of a place or biannual, showing us the trajectory of where we're going better, where we're going worse, where are we stalling, what is the change that's actually happening. And this is from Cornwall's progress report on their vision, showing very clearly where they've gone worse, where they've gone better, and where they haven't changed in the course of years. It can be used as a compass to prioritize projects, budgets, actions within local and regional government. So basing the allocation of budget, prioritizing projects based on where and how the city is really needing work, based on where you're really doing poorly through the lenses of donut economics. It could be used as a way to start setting future goals and transition. This is Mexico donut and Mexico's donut right now and Mexico's desired donut for 2040, starting to set out the policies and the actions that they would need to do in order to change this mirror of a city, in order to change those wedges. So it's kind of a compass for a future transition. It could be used as a starting point for an outcomes framework for various vision, city scale visions or neighborhood scale visions. So this is in Cali, Colombia, where they've chosen a big set of indicators through which they're measuring, and they will be tracking how well they're doing towards achieving their vision. And it can be used as well as a multi-stakeholder compass for action in a place. So not just by one organization or local government, but how can many places, many organizations, many initiatives come together, guided by this common compass towards change? What can everybody contribute? What can the businesses, the community organizations, the individuals, the households contribute? And finally, the final approach is exploring a topic. And this is about putting anything in the middle of these 4 lenses. So whether it's a strategy, a policy, a project, initiative, a whole sector, and asking and of dissecting it or visioning it through the lenses, through the 4 lenses. In this example, it's thinking about a new community center and asking how can it contribute positively in all of the 4 lenses of the donut. And again, this can be used as a way to do project visioning or project assessment, as well as they do in Valence Romance in France. So assessing how a project is doing and what is the impact of a given project on both the social and ecological indicators on the donut. It can be used as a way to discuss and to envision strategy designs in various sectors, or to lead kind of sector level conversations around the four lenses. So these were kind of a glimpse through the various possibilities of action and many case studies and places that are already demonstrating them. And finally, the one thing that I think remains quite important about the four lenses is that they lend themselves to be playful. And we often underestimate how important this is, but we need to be reimagining the future to handle the crisis of today. And being creative and playful needs to be a part of it in order to be able to come up with this new vision. So it's a framework that lends itself to, you know, a Miro board or post-it notes on a poster, or the four lenses can become floor lenses, or they can become windows, or they can become creative whole design sheets, or they can be sketches where everybody can design. So we invite everybody to kind of experiment and play with these concepts and to learn from the various case studies of action of how they can actually be turned into practice. So having said that, I will now pass on to the practitioners here who will share a bit about what it means to be turning this into practice. And we start with Kat. So Kat Rawsthorne is a Doughnut economics researcher at CIVIC SQUARE, and she'll share how four lenses have been used at a neighborhood scale in Birmingham. She joined CIVIC SQUARE as a neighborhood Doughnut economics researcher this year, having previously worked on Ladywood's first neighborhood data portrait, and following her master's in sustainable cities from University of Leeds, in which she explored social policy implementation gap in the city from a degrowth and Doughnut economic perspective. She also co-authored the Leeds Doughnut economic portrait. So Kat, on to you to share a bit about the practice in CIVIC SQUARE.
Thanks, Leonora. Very grateful to be here and be part of Global Doughnut Day. Very exciting. Can you all see my screen? Just checking with that. Yeah, great. I'll just crack on then because we've not got too long. So I thought I'd start with a little bit around who we are, what we do at CIVIC SQUARE. So we're an initiative based in Ladywood, a neighbourhood in Birmingham here in the UK, working to demonstrate the civic and social infrastructure for the climate transition of our homes, streets and neighbourhoods to be collectively led, designed, owned, governed by the people who live there. So our foundational ideas around neighbourhood transitions are rooted in the multiple interconnected crises of the 21st century, as we're seeing the cascading impacts of our entangled wider economic and political systems, both driving inequality, injustice and ecological degradation, impacting pretty much every aspect of our lives. So we know that the scale of the challenge is significant and it's complex, but it urgently needs transition. So this kind of forms the backdrop of our work since 2019. And for us at CIVIC SQUARE, the neighbourhood is an incredibly important unit of change because it brings together this big picture. It's where we feel the impacts of the polycrisis most viscerally and tangibly, but it's also where our agency and our ability to organise is the highest, creating massive opportunity for creating change in our place. So back in October 2022, we launched our Neighbourhood Doughnut Portrait, which is a synthesis of everything that we've discovered over the first 3 years of our work in the neighbourhood. It asks big questions, acts as a compass, as Leonora said, and helps us to navigate the journey towards a regenerative and distributed by design neighbourhood that's built for the long term. So this portrait of place is composed of a community and data portrait of place, which is co-created with neighbours and partners. And this enables us to see an overall picture of ourselves, the challenges, the opportunity, the vision, as Leonora said, the beauty, the joy, the dreams, the data, and the stories of our place, which collectively together helps us to ask, who are we? What do we need to transform? What's working well? What could we be? What bold goals are we working towards? And for us, this neighbourhood portrait of place isn't a static exercise. It's very much the start of something a lot bigger, providing the first iteration of a living open source dashboard for the neighbourhood, co-created by all of those who live there. So everything that we've learned through these first 2 layers of the community and data portrait of place underpins and informs the 3rd layer of this portrait, the deep demonstration of transformative practice across different scales in the neighbourhood from the home, street and neighbourhood, which is very much a continual evolving methodology. But for us, ongoing collaboration as a neighbourhood in Ladywood is fundamental to our wider emerging mission, focusing on the civic infrastructure that is required for neighbourhoods to be at the forefront of their climate transitions. And we'll be discussing this layer in more depth at our own Global Doughnut Day programme today from 2 p.m. GMT time onwards, which of course you're all welcome to. So as I've mentioned, the co-creation of our community portrait of place didn't take place over a specific day or two. It was very much an ongoing, deeply embedded process in our everyday organising in the neighbourhood. So over the past 4 years, we've created hundreds and hundreds of participatory, immersive entry points, spanning everyday interactions over a cup of tea and a cake, or after school club, to much larger convening and festivals. We've just wrapped up Retrofit Reimagined for this year in Glasgow yesterday, as an example of that. And we feel that all these layers are absolutely vital in nurturing civic agency, imagination, and local action, and that these efforts collectively set the path for addressing those more substantial systemic challenges together in our neighbourhood, very much built on trust, distributed knowledge, and strong relationships. And so our community portrait of place is about these typologies of entry points in our neighbourhood, which I'll speak to a couple of here. So you can see kind of the activities that compose that community portrait of place: peer-to-peer learning, journeys, visits to Centre of Alternative Technologies and learning from their practitioners, conversations with authors and visionaries, and so on. So the 4 lenses showed up throughout this in many, many ways. But in 2020, we designed our first phase of intentional co-creation as part of this unrolling the doughnut process. And this took the form of 4 festival-like co-creation weeks spread out over 12 months. So around 1 every 3 months, kind of learning and building on each co-creation week that had come before. And these acted as core anchor points and milestones in the process of developing our neighbourhood portrait of place. At this point, the deal methodology for creating a portrait with your community didn't exist. So we were very much experimenting with what it means to take these concepts off the page and bring them to life in practice in the neighbourhood, and learning as we go, leading into the possibilities of what could happen if we take these ideas and put them into the hands of the community. So co-creation weeks were designed to be very practical, outside in the neighbourhood, themed, immersive, very literally about, and metaphorically about, getting to grips with the ideas of a regenerative and distributed by design neighbourhood, starting where we are in our place in Ladywood. So the 4 lenses became an important tool throughout these key weeks, in which we prototyped certain methodologies that could then become everyday practices to support building literacy, participation, and agency across the neighbourhood. So I'll give a couple of examples. So co-creation week 2 was the first time that we introduced the 4 lenses and really started to unpack that safe and just space of the doughnut. What did it mean in our place of Ladywood? What did it look like for the people of Ladywood? So we centred the week around Deal's core inquiry questions that you've just seen, each of the 4 lens questions, and turned the safe and just space language and ideas into a practical experimental co-creation. So for this week, we opened up the future of the CIVIC SQUARE site, which is an old derelict industrial building right in the heart of our neighbourhood in Ladywood in Birmingham, turning it into a pop-up studio and exhibition space. And each lens was kind of split up into its own zone of the studio. And throughout the week, we invited participation and co-creation and dived deeper into each of these lenses. The aim of this was to bring some of these concepts to life playfully and creatively, and very much at the human scale. We wanted people to be able to explore them in reality, holding discussions and conversations and dreaming about how they play out in their everyday lives in the neighbourhood, drawing out the interconnections and interdependence between the local scale and the global scales. So in this process, we provided some explainer visuals, we stripped back and simplified some of the language to help with this guiding of thinking about the 4 lenses in our place. We had Deal, Rob Shorter from Deal, and Leonora, you were also there for co-creation weeks as well, run a workshop using these visuals to really start to try and understand what it might look like to hold space for unpacking the 4 lenses in the neighbourhood on a regular basis. And we added some more open inquiry questions that were designed to solicit generative, constructive, and positive ideas and visions towards the big shared challenges, and what these questions meant in our place. that helped support some of the translations from taking those big, broad questions into making them more relatable and tangible in the neighbourhood. And this kind of open inquiry approach has been part of how we organise for a very long time. And the four lens framing is continually very well received in the neighbourhood, supporting exploratory conversations, provoking thought, and raising consciousness around the challenges that we're seeking to respond together in our place. And we find that as a canvas, it really helps bring tangibility and a strong entry point where people can see themselves reflected in the framework, opening up the possibilities for conversations and imaginations to expand within each lens and between the lenses from there. So here are some other photos to show that this is very much a continual practice. It's not a one-off pop-up conversation to be having. So this moves on to the next tool, which is if we go back to co-creation week 2, as the CIVIC SQUARE team became more and more confident with holding these conversations relating to the four lenses and the domains involved in unrolling the donut, the team thought about ways that we could make this more practical, more immersive, that could anchor it into regular participatory programming that neighbours would find enjoyable in their everyday lives. So from that, the four lens workshop was created, and this became very much a regular feature in subsequent co-creation weeks and beyond to this day. I'm running a workshop at our neighbourhood trade school in 2 weeks' time. And here you can see the first side of that canvas based off the four lens framework. So this canvas can be used to kind of go on a journey around your neighbourhood with neighbours and participants, each bringing their own curiosities, their own knowledge, and using the framework to relate to and make sense of what's coming up across our local ecology and our social fabric, and tying that into different scales as the four lenses supports, but in a way that's really practical and tangible and creative, kind of drawing this process and drawing out those interconnections as we go. So here you can see the second side of the canvas, which supports with the literacy of what you might consider throughout your explorations in each lens in your place. I think there's a link to the tool that will be shared in the chat as well, but you can find all of this in our Community Portrait of Place dashboard online, which again, I think the link will be shared. Yeah. So across the subsequent co-creation weeks and in other convening spaces, the team witnessed how this tool enables conversations to span really, really vast topics, from the local to the global, from anything from air pollution and health and land use to lichen, to financial instruments for new models of value creation and what it means to recommon the land and what that would look like, whilst also creating space for different vantage points, perspectives and experiences within that. For me, the best thing about this tool is that it can be used anywhere. It can be used at multiple points across the neighbourhood, multiple times, multiple seasons throughout the year, and can be built on for much deeper explorations of place. So we've been using this as a foundation for some of our neighbourhood science work, which again, you can find in the Community Portrait of Place dashboard. So there's some photos. That's mostly it from me. I just wanted to highlight that we use the four lenses in many, many ways across our work. So if you are interested in getting into some of the other layers of that portrait of place, then we have our own Global Donut Day programme from 2 till 6 p.m. GMT time today, where we'll host a range of sessions getting deeper into these layers of why and how we use the donut as our organising framework. I'll work with the donut as a design framework for the retrofit of an old industrial building in the neighbourhood into a regenerative public square, and other ways that we've been taking the theory off the page into deep practice at the neighbourhood scale. But very excited to hear some of that through the practitioners that we've got here today. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Kat. Thank you. That was amazing. I'm sure people have loads of questions that we don't have time for, which is why we've shared all these links in the chat, so you can take your time to explore the work of CIVIC SQUARE. And I really recommend it to everybody. So I'll invite our next speaker, Annika, who's going to be sharing about the working from a data portrait perspective with the city of Glasgow. Annika Hjelmskog is a public health researcher at the University of Glasgow. She's looking at whole system approaches for planetary health and inequalities, with a focus on applying donut economics to Glasgow as part of Gallant's Living Lab research program, seeking sustainable and equitable solutions to support Glasgow's just transition to net zero. Annika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leonora. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for having me this morning on this really exciting day. And Kat, thanks for your really beautiful presentation. That was really amazing. As Leonora just said, I am a researcher at the University of Glasgow, and I'm going to share a little bit this morning about our work with the Doughnut framework over the past 2 years or so. We've been working with a number of partners on this work, particularly Glasgow City Council. And you'll see from my presentation that the focus of the work so far has really been to try and explore and embed those Doughnut ideas and principles among different groups and departments across the city. So far we've found it really useful for collective visioning and goal setting. And we did start off with a data portrait, which I'm going to touch on as well as some of our plans for the next steps, and what we're going to be doing now that we've ended up with a pretty comprehensive and detailed vision of what Glasgow might look like if we could exist within the Doughnut. So I'll just give a little bit of background. A lot of the work that has been possible in Glasgow has been down to a pretty supportive political context and a progressive stance on issues like net zero and just transition from the City Council itself, and the specific timing of this project as well. So we were able to launch this work, which in Glasgow has been part of the C40 Cities Thriving Cities Initiative, while Glasgow was actually hosting COP26 2 years ago. So there was a lot of momentum going on in the city, and this project is something of a legacy from that. And at the same time, we've had a really good ongoing relationship between the university and the city council that has meant a history of collaborative working on some of the particular issues and priorities that are specific to Glasgow, mainly with some focus on the city's really ambitious goals for sustainability, but with that very clear need to focus on inequalities at the same time and deprivation in the city. So we were lucky to get 5 years of research funding for this Gallant programme that the Glasgow Portrait is now part of. And this Gallant programme is looking at using Glasgow as a living lab to trial sustainable and equitable solutions to the climate and ecological crises, which is also using the Doughnut as our conceptual framework. So this city-university partnership was already established, but is now ongoing. And we've got potential, hopefully longer-term applications for our portrait work that we've been spending a lot of time making sure our partners are on board with and buying into this vision that we've been trying to create together. So just a quick overview of our sort of timeline. And the first thing that we did, which was to create a data portrait using that methodology that Leonora went through in her slides, where we mapped targets and indicators across those different dimensions. And we found that Glasgow was already doing a lot of work that was relevant to the Doughnut goals, as you can see from some of those strategies up on the screen there. But there was often a lack of alignment or crossover between some of this kind of work that could have been really mutually reinforcing, or would maybe need fewer resources to get off the ground if there was more cross-departmental kind of working. And even in some places, we found some contradictions where certain ambitions or strategies were actually likely to work against each other or cancel each other out, but that those trade-offs weren't obvious unless we started to take that whole system view, which we were using the Doughnut to try and support. And that was really actually the purpose of the workshops that came afterwards, was to use that 4-lens framework to get stakeholders thinking really holistically about what thriving in the Doughnut would really mean for Glasgow across all 4 lenses and all 44 dimensions of the Unrolled Doughnut at the same time. So we held 5 different workshops with different groups and sectors, trying to hear from really diverse perspectives over the course of last year and the beginning of this year. And in total, I think we engaged about 130 participants, and it is their contributions to the workshops that have made up our finished portrait. Now, I'm actually not going to talk too much about the desk-based work and the data portrait. Deal were kind enough to host me on that topic before, and I know there is a presentation available online which goes through what we did at that stage of the process in more detail. And we found that a really useful starting point for the work, in terms of getting a good understanding of the state of the current system, and which also gave us a helpful set of existing or potential indicators that we might use to measure progress. And they give some suggestion of how close Glasgow might be to the donut now. But actually those indicators and those official city targets aren't being specifically included in our published portraits, because we haven't actually gone through the same process of co-design and co-production as we have for reaching our Thriving Glasgow definitions, which do form the bulk of our portrait, and which I'm going to just quickly move on to in the next slides. So these are the real substance of our collaborative work so far, these definitions of what thriving could look like in Glasgow. And it's a really broad, holistic vision of what Glasgow could look like across all 4 donut lenses if we were to get into that safe and just space. So most of these are taken from different workshop contributions, and they include the views and ideas of lots of different people across the city system. And we sit after the workshops, we analysed the different responses that we had, condensed them, amalgamated them, and we turned these answers to the workshop questions into, firstly, a concise definition of what thriving would mean for Glasgow in that dimension. And then we've got a more detailed description of what this could look like, which covers some of the contextual and enabling factors that will be really necessary to actually make progress on this in Glasgow. So this gives us a sense of the things we need to be keeping an eye on, measuring, making sure that they are included in any sort of smart, targeted policy responses that come out of this process. So overall, these definitions create our whole system vision of what a thriving Glasgow should be aiming for. And these definitions have now been officially endorsed by Glasgow City Council. They were approved at their Net Zero Committee and Council Administration Committee over the summer. So we've managed to get significant buy-in for this vision. And the next steps and challenges will be around how we operationalize that and measure it. So a lot of those initial outcomes from the data portrait will start to be really relevant again now that we have a real sense of what we should be looking for, and how we might sort of benchmark progress or success. So I'll just go through a really quick example of how this might work in getting stakeholders to think in systems, which is a really important part of the work so far. The full range of those definitions is really broad, but there are lots of important topics that come up repeatedly, and there are lots of different ways in to those 44 dimensions, depending on somebody's professional or personal background or area of interest. And it gives us a really useful tool to consider all those 4 lenses when we are thinking about particular priorities for the city. So say, for example, when we're thinking about transport in Glasgow, which is a really, really key sector in terms of both ecological impact, but also the opportunities that it offers for inclusion. These definitions can give us a sense of what we need to consider and think about, which includes reminding us of the things we don't want to overlook, especially in that global social lens, if we are trying to come up with a really, truly holistic approach to transport in Glasgow. So it just gives us a more systems-focused view on particular issues that we can start to explore from more than one place at once and try and make sure that those synergies are not forgotten or wasted. And it's also been really useful, we found, in working with stakeholders to consider possible co-benefits or trade-offs, which is another really important component of systems thinking. So there's an example here on the screen just about one of the Gallant work packages and city priorities, which is to increase community scale renewable energy in the city. And although it will ultimately be down to the city's democratic processes to decide where certain trade-offs might be acceptable or unavoidable, what this framework does is highlight where, if we make choices about how we implement certain strategies or aim to reach priorities in a way that does try to minimize those negative consequences, we can actually design actions and interventions that are making the most possible progress towards thriving in all four lenses by our actions on just one specific policy area. So we found that really helpful in the workshops in bringing up that kind of interconnected thinking and understanding those co-benefits and negative consequences that can often happen when we keep our focus too local or siloed or separate. So that's been just a really quick whiz through some of what we've done and how we see it hopefully being applied and used in practice. We've got a vision to work towards. We've got a lot of buy-in across the system, which agrees that these goals are what we should be aiming for and where we should be trying to get to. In terms of our next steps, we are officially launching these definitions and publishing a report about our process next week on November 22nd. And we have the Gallant programme and the Thriving Cities initiative, which are both ongoing. And these next steps will be around how we operationalise some of these definitions at the right scale and in a way that might get us closest to that whole system transformation and total shift in the way we view and design our economic processes so that they take us closer to that thriving balance, which is so important for what we need to achieve going forward. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you might want to keep up with our journey, and please do get in touch if you wish. And I hope to be back on one of these calls soon to hear how everybody else is getting on with as well. I know we don't have time for Q&A today, but please do feel free to get in touch with any questions that you might have. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Annika. And yes, we have such a rich, unpacked schedule today, so no time for Q&A, but we've shared all the links in the chat, and a lot of what Glasgow has been working on is available on Deal's platform at doughnut.org. And thank you for sharing the experience and for highlighting the need for systems working and thinking if we are going to tackle the social and ecological crisis, and the possibility to use the four lenses framework as an entryway towards systemic ways of thinking. So I'll pass on quickly to our final speaker for today, and that's Kasper. Good to see you, Kasper. So Kasper Guldager Jensen is a sustainability pioneer, architect, and writer. He has recently joined the dark side, his words, as a real estate developer and co-founder of Home.Earth, with the aim to make people and planet positive homes. And he's one of the co-authors of the recently co-editors of this big collaborative effort recently launched, Doughnut for Urban Development Manual and Toolkit. So he'll share a bit about that work and using the four lenses as an entry point to work within a sector, specifically the urban development sector. So Kasper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leonora. One question. It looks like, do you have a live audience? Are you in a room with a live audience?
Yes, I'm in London.
Try and turn your camera.
That's a good idea. I'll turn the camera and spotlight the audience as well, Leah.
Okay. Very good. No, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm gonna produce my input for 10 minutes to I'll talk for 10 minutes about this this book that we co-developed with Deal, and it's about how to practice the donut economics in an urban environment for a real estate developer as myself, for example. I think basically that was the need for me to engage with this, is that I think it's very important to be able to practice in order to make impact. So how do I practice, and how do anyone in the construction sector or the real estate industry, how do we practice the donut? So that was the motivation for me. I will do these slides rather fast, but me, I'm an architect. I have started a company that is called Home.Earth, and we want to do people and planet positive homes. So really, how do we act within the planetary boundaries, and how do we do that with a social agenda, affordability, livability, community, and we have been so lucky to work with Deal, the extended Deal team, on taking donut economics, and also with the senior scientists from Stockholm Resilience Center, who are behind the planetary boundaries, kind of the outside of the donut, and a lot of other brilliant team members, universities, advisors, to make the donut for urban development. And I think it's 2.5 weeks ago we launched it on Deal's platform, and very happy to have Leonora and Kate endorse it. And also what we launched then, I will try to make a warp speed presentation of. The book itself, it kind of unfolds. So when you unfold it, it shows that we have the original donut. We have a donut for urban development that is very slightly adjusted. I'll go into that later. And then we have a social wheel and an ecological wheel with a lot of impact areas and a lot of ways to assess and practice the donut. It's not only me, we have been 20 co-authors on the book, and also a lot of experts in addition, and a lot of organizations. I would like to highlight one person, that is Dani, who should have joined us today. She's unfortunately ill, my co-editor in crime. So the donut came to life through a series of physical workshops, this one in London with Deal, this one in Stockholm with Stockholm Resilience Center, and this one was the official launch in Copenhagen, physical, and then we had the digital launch a few weeks ago. Everything is online available. You can download both the donut in English and in Danish, but also in support to that, a scientific publication that goes deep with the different focuses on allocation, on life cycle assessment, on the social foundation, and also tools and workshop materials. So if you look at this donut, we're being very true to the you can say the original donut. However, we do have on the outside on the ecological ceiling, we do a dual split. We focus on climate stability, and we focus on healthy ecosystem. That is a point that we got aware of working with Stockholm Resilience Center. Out of the planetary boundary limits, you have a core boundary on climate change and a core boundary on biodiversity. The social foundation, we also split into 4 areas of connected, inclusive, equitable, and responsible, in order to align the social dimensions with those also of the coming EU taxonomy. So going into like 3 chapters, the social foundation, this is the social wheel, as we like to refer to it. So each of the original dimensions from the donut, for example, that of housing, has been split into local impact areas, affordable housing, high quality homes, and then also global impact areas. So how do what we do when we build affect, of course, locally and globally, inspired by the four lenses framework. Obviously, I think this is a major point of the donut and also of the book, that we need to consider both the local and the global impact of our actions. The book also provides examples of how this has been practiced, with focusing on various areas. This is some social housing, or it's actually private housing and social housing context that is creating strong neighborhoods, and also integration of different sort of residents. Here is the ecological ceiling for urban development. Again, we are then taking a resolution on, you can say, the outside of the donut and breaking it into 48 different areas that each have a local and global impact. So you could again say, what do we do with climate stability? It's about making a carbon budget, and so on and so forth. Again, example, this is a newly erected wooden type house here in Copenhagen. Again, trying to say, well, how far you actually can come, how low ecological footprint can you achieve by working on commercial, in a commercial context. About the donut, I think you often forget the inside or the in-between. So what's the space we need to move within. And I like the way the deal is challenging business thinking. We need to move from a traditional and challenge that. Airbnb challenge the hotel industry, but they also have flip sides. So Airbnb is challenging Airbnb. So really, the work made me aware of how can we move from an old thinking towards a new thinking. How do we need to understand the purpose, the networks, the governance, ownership, and the financial structures of the companies that we engage with, or the companies that we start up or collaborate with. So in short, that's a donut for urban development book. In order to make it very practical, we also said, well, it's about three things. We need to have absolute carbon budgets. We need to set biodiversity targets, not just on-site, but off-site. And we need to have a rich and transparent way to assess the social impact, again, locally and globally. And this is a screenshot from the database. So there's an Excel file with these 96 impact areas and 200 ways to assess them. So again, available for download, either through the homepage of home.earth/donut or Deal's own website. I guess, Leonora, if you can share that in the thread of this dialogue. And to end it off, we also made a toolkit that enables, facilitates workshops how to assess the donut. So this is about understanding the donut, applying it to your context, and also to make specific actions for you to actually act on each and every urban development that you are in charge of. I think I'll leave it with this slide, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kasper. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, this is an open source resource, and you can find it all in the chat and our platform, and you can buy the book as well and deep dive a bit into how to use the donut for urban development. So with that, maybe you can stop sharing the screen, Kasper, if you can. Yes, it's time to close our session. I believe in the chat you'll have info about what and how to join next. Here in person, we can stay a bit more. And so wishing everybody a happy Global Donut Day, and bye for everybody here in London.